Hey, hey, Brandon. First question, what is your name?
I'm Lionel Craver.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Dallas, Texas, April 3rd, 1939.
Okay. Where did you grow up and go to school?
Well, the first town that I went to school in was Wichita Falls, Texas. I went to David Crockett Elementary School.
Alright. And, when you lived in Texas,
Was this the first school? That was just the first school. He's got.
um, so where else did you go to school?
I moved to Midland, Texas, and in Midland, Texas, I went from the third grade through high school and graduated. Graduated from Midland High School.
When did you graduate?
I graduated in 1957.
And while you lived in Texas and went to school, do you remember the facilities and the schools being segregated?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any memories or stories of what that was like or how it made you feel?
Okay, the way the schools were segregated in Midland were kind of strange, I think. At that time, I don't think I thought they were strange. When I was in the third grade, that's the way it was. And the way it was segregated is blacks had to go to their schools, and they all lived in the same part of town. And then there were, I guess, what we call Mexicans then, and they were really Hispanics. They weren't Mexican citizens; they were United States citizens.
Yep.
But they had to go to a particular elementary school. There were no Mexicans in our elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I went to junior high, elementary school was first through the sixth grade. And when I went to junior high, there were Mexican students in our classes. And, I didn't see much of a change there. I mean, I can remember the students, Rodolfo Sanchez was one of my friends, and Johnny Moreno.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a change for them.
Yeah.
They came to our school. But, and then, there were not many Mexicans in our high school. I'm not sure how many, but a pretty small percentage of classes were Mexican.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I do remember is we had a youth center in my high school.
Yeah.
And across the street from the high school. And when I had gone to college, my brother wrote me and told me, he said, that now they have opened the youth center to Mexican students.
And that was a big deal.
I never thought that it was closed to them. I never had thought about that.
What I'm hearing is a lot of the segregation, like you experienced during school, like it wasn't really like a big deal during that time. Like it was just the way things were. Is that right?
Yeah. There weren't any people trying to get it changed. No.
And while you were in school, do you remember like participating in like extracurricular activities with other races, or like otherwise being prevented from doing so?
Yes, with other races. I don't remember anything about that. I mean, there were Mexicans that went to our high school, and they did just like everybody else. I mean, Johnny Marino was on the golf. He was one of the four golfers that played in all the tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I guess, about the only thing I remember in particular.
And like in like sports and things like that, did your school play against like the black high schools, or did that not happen?
No.
No.
No, it did not happen.
Did you like consciously like notice that that you didn't play against the schools? Was that an issue for anyone, or just was that just kind of the way it was?
I think that's just the way it was, and that's just a very particular part of the segregation. I mean, the other part of the segregation, there were many other parts,
Mm-hmm.
like the movie theaters downtown. The blacks could not sit downstairs; they all had to sit in the balcony.
Ah, so,
And most of the stores downtown, the blacks could not go into the stores.
mm-hmm.
Like I remember there was a particular men's store that had nice clothes and everything, and you never would see a black in that store.
Yeah. So blacks had their own stores and like their own movie theaters. Is that
They
correct?
didn't. I don't know. They didn't have other movie theaters. They just had to come to our theaters, or what I guess
Oh.
I would call our theaters, but they had to sit in the balcony.
Ah, so they had to sit up in the balcony. And when you were young, do you remember like differences in like the types of jobs available to whites and blacks?
Do I remember it? I'm not sure. Yeah. Most of the time when I guess the whole time I lived in Midland, we always had a maid, and she was always black.
Oh, could you talk more about that? About maybe some stories or memories about growing up with the black maid?
Yes. Our language, we used the word nigger
Mm.
as children, and my parents, really didn't like for us to use that word, but we did. I can remember one time, in one of the things in particular, the word that we used is, my brother and I were in the house one day, and our maid was ironing in this room, and I don't know why, but my brother said, well, let's go outside now. And we would do this kind of thing often.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would say, all right, I'm going to be the first one out. The last one outside's a nigger baby.
Mm.
And that was something that, kids just said.
Yeah.
And he said that in front of the maid.
Oh.
Which was, I know that was embarrassing to my mother.
But like that wasn't like that word, I imagine back then was not anywhere near as much of a big deal as it is now. It was just kind of like what you called them, or I mean, was it still kind of derogatory?
It was still kind of derogatory, yeah.
Yeah. And so you were in college at the University of Texas in the late 50s and early 60s. And
Right.
during this time, were you aware of the civil rights movement?
Was I aware of what?
The civil rights movement?
Oh, I guess I was. I'm not sure. I know I went to the University of Texas in 1957.
Ah.
And there were essentially no blacks on campus.
Oh.
I mean, there may have been one, and there were no blacks on the athletic teams.
Were you aware of that at the time? Like, was that?
I was.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, do you remember any like media coverage of the civil rights movement or like events of the civil rights movement at any point?
I guess I would say no. I wasn't aware of it. If I was, I didn't participate.
No.
Yeah.
Do you remember during college like socializing with blacks or Mexicans at all, or was it just like very separate?
Well, since there were no blacks on campus when I first started, I'm not sure when. I don't remember any blacks in my classes
Oh.
when I was at the University of Texas, and I was there from 57 to 62.
Mm-hmm.
But
And So, uh, do you um do you remember any of people you were around participating in the civil rights movement, or anyone talking about it, or things like that?
When I was in college there, no.
No. Um.
And then, in fact, then I was in college, at the University of New Mexico, and I don't remember anything like that, and I don't remember anything like that when I was at the University of Oklahoma.
Oh.
What I do remember at the University of Oklahoma were people against the Vietnam War.
Ah. Yeah. And where were you after college during the later '60s civil rights movement?
Let's see, in the latter 60s, I was working and going to school in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
And do you remember, were things still segregated then, or were things becoming less segregated?
Well, that was a different place for me,
Mm-hmm.
but I really do not remember any blacks on campus. I'm sure there were, in Albuquerque, there were no blacks. In the University of New Mexico, there were no blacks in my classes.
Ah. And when you were working after college, did you work with blacks, or remember having any black friends?
No.
Ah.
When I worked at the Indian National Laboratory in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was in a group of students that worked in the morning and went to school in the afternoon, and there was one black in that program, and there were about 100 students in that program. I was aware that there was a black.
When were you aware of changes after civil rights in like segregation of society and stuff?
Gosh, I guess when I lived in El Paso, I moved to El Paso after I got my PhD in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
In El Paso, there were a lot of blacks. Not a lot, but I mean, there were blacks. And I don't think they were segregated. They were not segregated in El Paso.
Oh.
That was a different place than the other places I had lived in. And so, I mean, I'm sure there were, in any restaurant that I would go in, there would be a black. It wouldn't be an unusual thing, like would have been where I